Welcome to another edition of Forecast Lab, and what a pattern change we have. The western U.S., lots of stormy cloud material, cold air advection, and a line of snow showers in Utah. And that's a look at the west coast with extensive cold air advection and another trough on its way. Well, let's take a look at that surface map and work our way from east to west. Starting out with the eastern U.S., a ridge all the way from the eastern Great Lakes down the Appalachians, some mild weather there. You can see the dew points are in the upper 40s to around the lower 50s. As we go further to the east, dew points are about the same. The moisture return, the warm air advection, all that is getting started up, but the moisture is just not in place. We find that down there in South Texas. There's the 60s dew points, and that's going to start feeding up over the next day or so, and we'll see this moist sector start to strengthen up, and the dry line along the caprock will firm up a little bit. So right now I've only got that analyzed from about Midland up to Pratt, but with strong pressure falls out in the Rockies, we're going to see that dry line start to firm up a little bit. And then looking out west, there's our active cold front, snow showers from western Wyoming down to the Salt Lake City area. There is a lot of beam blockage, so we can't see too much of it, but some evidence right there in the southern Wasatch Mountains. Satellite is a forecaster's best friend. We can see right over those mountain ranges into remote areas, and what we see here is mostly a lot of high cloud. I don't really see much evidence of heavy showers. In fact, I think that's going to be further out to the west where we have some of the stronger convection with the cold core low, the cold mid and upper level temperatures, and the strong heating at the surface. You can see those breaks right there, allowing some of that sunshine through. Around the Salt Lake City area, it doesn't really look too bad, but probably right in here we've got a little bit of forcing, helping to get those showers going. All right, let's take a closer look at some of this data. Now, we're back in AWIPS, which is the software used by the National Weather Service. So you're kind of looking at what the Weather Service forecasters are also looking at. So there's Utah, there's Nevada. You can see the Bear Clinic cloud shield right there across the Salt Lake City area, the cold air advection cumulus out to the west. And then out to the east, that's going to be your warm sector with rather nice conditions, mild, maybe even warm. But let's start adding a few fields on here to see what we're looking at. We'll start with the surface plots. So looking out there in Colorado, yeah, it's definitely on the mild side. 68 at Grand Junction, right there, and 61 at Hanksville. And you can see the southwest wind. But you go a little bit further to the west, we pick up those gusty northwest winds, temperatures near freezing, and of course the precipitation. And pretty much the same story as you go west, but it does get a little bit more showery, some breaks in the overcast, and of course the cold core convection. So now we've added pressure from the high resolution rapid refresh. That pretty much paints out right where the front is. In fact, up there in Wyoming, that's going to be a little bit off the chart. Let me see if I can get that map up there. You can see the big change in the air mass going from Casper, Riverton, out into the Jackson Hole area. So back here, all the precipitation, typical antifront setup, the leading edge of the front, that's going to be kind of right in there. You can see the change from one side to the other. And if you don't, freeze frame the video and take a closer look at that. We can also explore that with potential temperature, which is a field that I like quite a bit because it removes some of the effects of elevation. So that does paint out the thermal gradient. And that goes from about Riverton down through north central Utah and back along Interstate 15. So that gradient right there, that's going to be your frontal zone. And if we look at the patterns further out west, we get some idea of where the colder air is. Yeah, that's going to be right in here. It is deformed a little bit by an area of slightly warmer temperatures, but that is going to be the cold pool at the surface. And of course the wind to help us visualize all that. Westerly wind coming in from the Pacific, very cold air back there, and out ahead of that front, southwesterly winds. Okay, so now you all know all the details of that Utah weather system. So I guess we should take a look at the rest of the map, eh? All right, so heading out to the west coast, we've got showers also in Northern California, a strong trough over California with very cold upper-level temperatures. In fact, Oakland set its record low temperature for the date last night at minus 26.5 Celsius. That broke the record of minus 24.7. And with those very low temperatures, you're going to get very low thicknesses. In fact, yeah, there's a thickness trough right through there, painting out the colder air. So, although the surface map did indicate some of the colder air was right in this region, the synoptic scale picture shows that it extends all the way back into Washington and Oregon. So at the surface, the cold air is over northern Nevada, but further to the west, we pick up the colder air in this region, and that gives us that tilt towards the colder air that we get with height. So with increasing height in a baroclinic system, the low will appear to tilt into the cold air as you go aloft. All right, enough of that. Let's take a look up north. Snowstorm in Alberta and Saskatchewan. Temperatures pretty mild. Instead of minus 10, minus 20, we've got 20 above, very close to freezing. And of course, with temperatures that close to freezing, you're going to get those large sticky flakes, and it's not going to pile up quite as much, but it does reflect a lot of liquid content. So very likely some travel problems through that area. And then taking a look up to the north in Alaska, things are going to change. Towards the weekend, we're going to set up a strong northerly flow event in southeastern Alaska. I'll try to get to that in just a little bit, but for now, a deep Gulf of Alaska low and temperatures pretty typical for this time of year, just above freezing in the interior valleys. Some more cold air coming out of the Northwest Territories through Nunavut. Cold air advection there into northern Quebec. And there you see that, gusting up to 53 knots. So that's certainly blizzard conditions, feeding into that Labrador Sea low pressure area. Some of that snow showers extending all the way down towards Goose Bay, but at that airport itself, still liquid precipitation. And then we see some very mild conditions in Maine, 60s, and we get back into our other system there in the Great Plains. So this is probably a good time to take a look at the models, but yeah, before I do that, down to the south, we've got ourselves a hurricane making landfall in Belize. And you're looking at Hurricane Lisa, Category 1 storm with a westward movement at 14 miles an hour, and that's going to get hung up in these mountainous areas of Mexico. All right, taking a look at our long wave pattern, what do we got here? Let's see. That looks like a long wave, another long wave right there, possibly one through there, and then this looks like another one. I don't know if that's one or two, but yeah, we're looking at, I guess, a 4 to 5 wave pattern, which is going to be slightly progressive. And you can see that the most active region is in the Pacific. There's the stronger jet streams. And let's take a look what happens over the next couple of days. Now, we're definitely in a negative P&A pattern. Let's zoom that in a little bit. A negative P&A pattern is basically the opposite of a west coast ridging pattern. Of course, it's not quite that simple. There's a few other points that the P&A index references, but this pattern is strongly negative P&A, and the Pacific is open. And with these jets on the west side of the trough, that's going to help deepen it over the next 24 to 48 hours. You can see that taking place right there by Friday, deep trough across the southwestern U.S., and another jet up there in the Gulf of Alaska. And the next trough is going to be associated with that jet. You can see it digging on down into California, another trough by Monday or Tuesday. and that'll affect the central U.S. later in the week. And we'll talk a little bit about Alaska here. Now, as we mentioned, there is a deep Gulf of Alaska low, and that's going to be it right there. Kind of a double barrel low right there. And the occluded front extends southward. The cold and warm front are way off to the south, but that's not really important at the moment. Now, if you want to follow along, you can see the GFS forecast hours, 6 hours, and the valid time in your lower right. And we're going to advance this forward, and you can see starting out temperatures are about 0 to 15 in the inland areas. Let's see what happens as we go into the end of the week and the weekend. All right, so moving this forward, 15 to 0, okay. Go a little bit further, 0. Now we're up to Saturday and Sunday, starting to see minus 15. So we're starting to get some really frigid weather in that part of the country. Minus 15 through all of Yukon. And then somewhere around Tuesday or Wednesday, we warm up. Now let's go back to the beginning, and we're going to look at the pressure. Okay, so we're back to today's date. That Gulf of Alaska low moves off into southeastern Alaska, and it's replaced with high pressure starting to build up there in northern Alaska. So that gives us a gradient kind of like that. You're going to see this high settle in across Yukon, and watch the gradient right in this area here. So we're up to Saturday, and let's see here, going into Sunday, Monday, strong gradient, and that is going to drive the winds. You can see right there on those GFS plots, seeing about 20 to 30 knots. Let me see if I can bring up that shading. It's kind of a coarse grid there, but yeah, it looks like some blustery conditions setting up around Sunday, going into Monday through southeastern Alaska. And that's going to bring cold air into the southeast part of the state. And believe it or not, in Alaska, at least in that part of Alaska, they're advising people to check their pipes and make sure they're wrapped. You don't hear that too often. Usually that's advice for New Orleans and Jacksonville, Florida. And the reason for that is you usually don't get those blustery north winds this early in the winter. Now, one other thing that I forgot to show you is the very impressive pressures. Let's take this back to the beginning, clean this up just a little bit, and look at the pressures once again. There goes that Gulf of Alaska low, and we see the high pressure building in from the north. You can see 1052 millibars. That's very high pressure, 1056, 1058, 1056. So we peak around Sunday or Monday across Yukon. So that does have potential for getting into the United States itself, the lower 48, but I'm not too sure there's enough volume for that to come down into the prairies. I guess it might, but that's still at least a week off. Yeah, there you go. 1044 millibar high coming into northern Canada and wrapping some of that cold air back across Alberta. So that's something we're just going to pay attention to maybe a week from now. Could be the first really cold event in parts of the northwestern U.S. As a bonus, I'll go through this chart and show that building into the northwestern U.S. This is going to be starting out tonight. Some cold air up there in Alberta associated with that snowstorm, and we roll that forward. That low pressure area departs into the Hudson Bay region. We get a area of low pressure up there in Alberta, westerly flow into Washington, so not much going on just yet. But early next week, yeah, now you're seeing those pressures starting to come up right in here. So that's going to be that big high nosing into the northwestern U.S. And see how that unfolds. Yep, quite a bit of cold air moving into Montana, maybe Spokane by Tuesday, and pushing all the way down into Wyoming. So the leading edge of that front, at least the Canadian air, is running about like that. There's probably a Pacific system extending to the south, but this is going to be some rather frigid air. Let's see, 270 degrees Kelvin, which is minus about 28 Fahrenheit, and then you reduce that for elevation, you're probably looking at temperatures in the teens or single digits. Let's see here, I can probably bring that up. Yeah, 0. 0 around Great Falls, and that's an evening temperature next Tuesday. So this will be something to keep an eye on, and I think at the very least there should be some snowfall potential across the Dakotas and parts of the northern Rockies. And then, of course, Texas and the southwestern U.S., well, that weather system way out there is going to be coming our way. Now, I've kind of created a messy chart here, but all of the fields that I've got here are important. So let's see how this comes together. Okay, going forward, our frontal system comes out of Utah in the Four Corners area. By tomorrow, it's going to be moving into New Mexico. And let's take a look and see where that front is by tomorrow evening. Now, already we can pick out the dry line. See that strong moisture discontinuity? We go from 40 around Clovis to 50 just west of Lubbock and up to 60 on the Caprock. So that is going to mark a dry line roughly like that. There we go. I realized it was kind of hard to see those state outlines. Let's continue. Okay, tomorrow evening, dry line right there. The front looks like that's coming through Albuquerque, maybe through Lordsburg and Silver City, and back behind it, the Anna front and the cold advection cumulus and shower activity. So not much is going to be going on tomorrow, but by Friday, let's bring that forward. There's Thursday night, there's Friday morning, and already by the morning hours, we've got the Canadian front coming south. That's going to be the frontal zone. The Pacific front emerging through Midland and onto the Caprock, and it's pretty much swallowed the dry line up. Now we've got the moisture return coming up. You can see the 60s dew points and even the 70-degree isodrosotherm right there along Interstate 10. So it will be a rich environment for precipitation. Precipitable water is going to be pretty high. And then as the afternoon goes on, we get the heating. Let me zoom that in so you can kind of see what's going on here. Now, one important factor with this system as we get into the afternoon hours is the flow is going to be somewhat unidirectional. This is going to be 4 p.m. You can see the thickness lines in red out here. That's suggesting that the jet stream is running about like that. So that doesn't reflect very much veering with height. So we're not going to see a whole lot of directional shear near the surface. You can see the winds in the warm sector right here out of 160 to 170, contrasting with maybe 210 aloft. And typically when we see that, we're looking at squall lines. This favors MCS, cold pools linking up, and numerous storm cells. So one way we could get severe weather is if we get a mesolow somewhere in this area, locally backing the wind. There's not going to be any way to know that this far out, but that will be something to keep an eye on Friday. So during the evening, squall line moving through Dallas, Waco, Austin, up towards Tulsa. You can see a little bit of backing out there in northeast Texas, so I would not be surprised to see some severe weather potential around there. And then by 10 p.m., cold pool-driven system moving eastward, squall line right there into the lower Mississippi River Valley. Now, one thing I do want to check is the forecast soundings. Pivotal weather does make that pretty easy to get, so let's bring that up to the Friday time period. There's the pivotal weather version. You can see that system developing and the parcels out ahead of that line. Well, I'm not seeing tremendous lapse rates. That's going to be probably in the moderate range. Cape's about 1,000. So after dark, even though it's got PDS tornado here, I think this may be a little bit too weak as far as instability. So we'll check that out on Friday and see if there's any big changes. But so far, I'm not really too sure we're going to get much severe weather. Yeah, that's almost conditionally unstable. Not much of a cap there. This is going to be numerous cells competing with one another. So a lot of times these hazard types don't actually get realized especially at nighttime. Well, that's going to do it for this evening. We've ran way over time. Anyway, here's some great footage from Greg. Thanks very much for this clip. And we'll see everybody back here on Friday, and we'll talk about that severe weather event in Texas. Take care. Bye-bye.